Good morning, everybody, and as Courtney's here joining us, thanks very much for joining us this morning. A beautiful morning here as I look out from the Ireland's ancient east, and also want to welcome everybody from the wild Atlantic way and from our hidden heartlands, of course, as we get into this really exciting webinar, which I'm really excited about. So if you get a chance there, you might just pop something in the chat just to let us know that you're in and that you can hear and that you can see the screen and everything like that. Our own team in Marina's on line to also support us if there's anything that we need. But please pop in some comments there to let us know that you can see the screen and everything is working well. So thanks very, very much for joining us. A special thanks, of course, to Paul Kelly and Colin Hughes, who will get into introducing a little bit later. Thanks to Marina and the Great Place to Work team. And a special welcome to a couple of organizations who have put this webinar out to their wider management group, right? So the Office of Government Procurement, for example, and Chadwick's, have begun to extend these webinars to the broader management group. And if anybody else wants to do that in terms of clients, we'd be delighted to talk to them and to support this content getting out there and being available. So thank you very much for that. We're happy to take questions, and I'll moderate some of those questions very soon. I'll be finishing up here and handing over to Paul and Colin to move into that discussion, which I know you're all excited about. But if there are any questions or any things that occur to you as you go along, please pop them into questions and answers, and we'll do our best to collate those and to put them into a good question and answer format later on. So I suppose the first thing that I'd like to touch on here is to say this is the second senior leader in a short period of time who've joined us from Fáilte Ireland. So while it's two men having a discussion today and I'm doing the introduction, we have a video recording which is on our website of much of the content, or all of the content that we've been producing over the past 12 months, which has gone down very well with clients. And you'll hear an excellent presentation by Sharon, who's head of HR at Fáilte Ireland, on the application of values in their new development of values in Fáilte Ireland. And you can click onto our website, see all that content, and please make use of that and make use of that in terms of the wider teams. I'd also just like to mention that we've another webinar coming up on the 27th of May, with Kuna Nagel, WorkVivo, and of course our own Cathal Divley, our CEO, and that will be on internal communication, which comes up over and over again. In fact, I don't think there's a set of results from any organization ever that I have seen in my period of time working where communication doesn't come up as some issue in some way or another, and that'll be really worthwhile for people to log in and to take part in. Okay, so that broad range of content. I want to thank TU Dublin, and particularly Colin, who's going to lead the interview today, in terms of the association that we've had around Ireland's most trusted leaders. And that's been going on for quite some time at this period, and we really appreciate that support. Here are the previous two most trusted leaders. So you got Pamela and Declan over the past 2 years. And this ongoing association of highlighting the really great work that's being done in Irish organisations from a leadership point of view and the inspirational work. It's a great privilege to be able to highlight that, to be able to research into that, and to be able to learn from that. So to make those kinds of things accessible to everybody is a great privilege from our point of view. So we're very thankful to TU Dublin for that ongoing association. We're very thankful for them for the continued learning. In fact, I got an opportunity last week to have a look with Colin at some of their content for the coming year and their program, and I would encourage anybody to have a look at that. One of the things that Colin, in terms of executive education, is particularly adept at is bringing together that idea of theory and practice in a really accessible way. His own research has been on trust in virtual teams, and recently got his PhD in that. So a very timely announcement, and has got a real sort of accessibility in terms of how he lands the best learning from both theory and practice. And that's part of the strength of this discussion today. We have, I suppose, the insight from a theory point of view, and then the great example from Paul in terms of how that's put into action in tangible ways that you'll be able to make use of. And we're going to get into that. I want to mention a couple of things as well in relation to Paul, and while there'll be a broader introduction later, a couple of things that are really important and that I have learned from Paul, and our team really admire about Paul, and is backed up by the data. I suppose the first thing that's very striking when I met Paul for the first time about 4 years ago is his competence, right? So the extent of which his experience and his learning over the years, and his knowledge and his insight, and how he brings that to bear is very striking. And I'm sure you'll see that over the course of the webinar. The second piece is, I distinctly remember at the presentation of Great Place to Work results, the first one, Fáilte Ireland, to the wider, to the full Fáilte Ireland team. We're all in Amiens Street. I think there was about 400 people there. And when Paul stood up to speak, one of the first times I heard him to that wider group, the extent to which he was vulnerable, and how he did that was he laid out his plan for the organization. He staked his reputation on it. And he was very clear about what his vision was, and it was ambitious. So he put all of himself into that. It was just so inspiring. And I have to say, from my personal point of view, there was that little piece inside me which was a bit afraid for him, and a bit concerned, as you would be in terms of somebody making a really brave statement and a really brave commitment. So that vulnerability piece and that courage was absolutely there in spades. The second piece is the humility piece, and you'll see here while we have Ireland's most trusted leader, when we rang Paul and spoke to him about getting this special award, his first reaction, well, first of all, I think he was pleased, right? So I think there was a little smile I felt down the phone, and then the second thing was, he didn't say anything for a while, and he said, of course, this is an award for the whole leadership team at Fáilte Ireland. And that's why we have the photographs of the other leaders at Fáilte Ireland up here on the screen here. And because Paul is very, over and over again, and again, even this morning, stated about the strength of the team that he works with. And that's sort of, I suppose, a key piece in terms of his humility. And I think the last piece I'd like to mention is his ambition. So while he's got great empathy and sort of competence and humility, he couples that with great ambition. So, those are fantastic qualities, and it is a real privilege to introduce both of our speakers today, and for you to enjoy. And hopefully, as this goes along, you might please have a thought at the back of your mind as to say, what can I learn from this, and how might I apply it in practice on a day-to-day basis. So guys, without further ado, thanks very much to everybody for joining us. Thanks to Great Place to Work team, and I hand over to Colin and to Paul now.
Thanks, Jim, and good morning, everyone. Delighted to be here. I'm delighted to sponsor this award again this year for Ireland's Most Trusted Leader. I think leadership's an area, I suppose, that's really important for all of us, and given the scale of challenges in our various organizations and in society at large, I suppose strong leadership is perhaps more important than ever. We didn't get a chance to celebrate in the normal manner in the great annual awards event, but Jim and his colleagues put on a great virtual event, so really enjoyed that. I suppose just by Jim has given you some background to the award here, and really this award recognizes a special kind of leader. So someone who has the trust of their colleagues, who's able to build a strong culture of trust within their organizations. And there's decades of research on the benefits of trust and what that means for individuals, but also for organizations and wider society and so on. So it's an area I'm fascinated in, and that's why I'm particularly delighted to be here today and involved in this. Paul, I might start with a nice easy question for you, and that is, given the nature of this award and so on, why is trust so important? What does it mean to you as a leader?
Yeah, good morning, Colin. Good morning, Jim, and good morning, everyone. And thanks very much, Jim, for those very kind words, and particularly thanks for including the super team that I work with in Fáilte Ireland in your the top team in your slide. It's absolutely they're as much involved in all of this as I am. In terms of, to come to your question, Colin, in terms of the importance of trust. I suppose the way I say is, trust is absolutely not an end in itself. I think at the core, I would say, things are relatively simple. The vast majority of people want to do a really good job when they go to work. They want to do a really good job. They also want to enjoy their job, and they want to enjoy doing a good job. And I think, trust is essential to both of those, in terms of, if you want individuals and an organization to perform, then people need to trust each other. They need to trust their work colleagues, in any kind of team, whether it's a sports team or an organization, business team, public sector organization. If you want to perform as an organization, people need to trust that the people that are working with will do what they're supposed to do, so that individuals can then do what they're supposed to do. So everyone will pull their weight within it. And they also need to trust that people will have their back. So, in terms of, because people make mistakes, things go wrong, and people need to know that when that happens and we all slip up, that people around us will be there to help us, not to kind of put the boot in. So it's really important to organizational performance. And then it's also important to kind of enjoying doing your job. I mean, that's the one thing that will, I think, erode any kind of enjoyment and fulfillment from doing your job, is that if you don't trust the people you work with, it's just very hard to enjoy working. So I think, at its core, that's what it's about. It's about the organization being able to deliver and being able to perform really highly, and that's kind of the ultimate organizational end. But in order to achieve that, people have got to enjoy doing their jobs, and trust is essential for both of those things. And I would kind of say that, look, in terms of trust is the oxygen of organizations. If you work, and I'm sure there's lots of people on this call, and lots of us have the scars of working in low trust organizations, and it is kind of hard to breathe in those organizations. You do feel kind of constricted and stuff, but when there is trust, it's just like, it's not only it's oxygen, but it's an accelerant. The amount you can get done, if everyone trusts each other and doesn't need to kind of check in and kind of look over each other's shoulders and stuff like that, and doesn't need to worry about the petty politics or any of that sort of stuff, the amount an organization can get done is phenomenal. So that's, I suppose, in my mind, why trust is so important.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great one to as a lubricant. It greases the wheels of relationships and makes things happen. So I love that one. That's one I'll make a note of here. Paul, tell me, given that importance of trust and to both individual performance and enjoyment and all the rest of it, how have you gone about building a strong level of trust with colleagues and wider stakeholders?
I think, like most things, hard work is an awful lot of the story. It's not about being a nice person or being a trustworthy person. That's the beginning point. You've got to be that. You've got to, act with integrity at all times. In terms of you've got to, you've got to be prepared to act with absolute integrity all the time. But that's a given. There's lots of people who are very nice people, who are very trustworthy people, and lots of trustworthy people working in organizations, but there still ends up being low trust in those organizations, despite the fact that you've got a bunch of trustworthy people working with each other, but there's low trust between them. So so it requires systematic, I believe in large organizations, it requires systematic focus to deliver that level of trust. And there's no one silver bullet, unfortunately. And I know, in terms of, I'd love to come here and have a really pithy answer and say it's these three things or it's this one thing. But when I looked at the journey, maybe others have been able to do that. When I look at the journey we've taken in Fáilte Ireland, there's actually 10 top things, and these aren't the only things, but I think these are the 10 top things. So I'll go through them pretty quickly because I appreciate 10 is a long list, but I think all of them were really important in terms of building that trust. The first one, as Jim highlighted, was the top team, having a great top team that trust each other and that can work well together and have a shared vision and a shared commitment. And I was lucky enough to have that in Fáilte Ireland, and we most of it was in place. We built a little bit and added a bit to it, but and that is because you can't do this stuff on your own. In terms of it, you need a team. You need a team approach. So, top team and having a great top team is the first thing. And I think that's the first job of any leader of an organization, is to make sure their team is as good as it can be. The second bit then is around having the right kind of organizational strategy. And I'll talk to them in the order I did them, not necessarily the order of importance, but these were the order that I did them, and this was just my experience, and it will be different for different people in different organizations. But the strategy, and this was a strategy that was owned by the organization. I got a great from one of my directors, Paul Keeley and Deborah Nolan. I think when I came in, they both said to me, look, we know you're a new CEO and you're going to have a new strategy, but let us write it. Let us all get involved in writing it. It was a great bit of advice, because the strategic capability in the organization was phenomenal, and their expertise and understanding was phenomenal. So in terms of, we ended up with a strategy that, I'd say maybe 50 people in the organization were actively involved in writing, but everybody in the organization, at the time it was about 350 people, everyone had the opportunity to input to that before it was finalized. So having a strategy that everyone feels owned and everyone can see themselves in doing. If you're working in an organization and you can't see the job you do in the organization strategy, it's very hard for you to really kind of feel comfortable in that organization, to feel you trust the organization trusts you, if you don't see yourself in the job you do somehow connected into that strategy. The third bit was about structures and processes. And, this is about making sure that you've got both organizational structures, but really importantly as well, processes. And processes are something that are quite often not looked at enough, to make sure that everyone understands what's their job and how does their job interact with other people's jobs, and where does the individual accountability sit within those processes? Who's got, who needs to be consulted? Who's got sign-off rights and stuff like that? It requires a lot of detailed, structured work, but it is the bedrock. Quite often, a lack of trust comes out of a lack of clarity around process. That people aren't clear of what their roles is, or structures that inadvertently are set up in a way to cause people to clash. So getting those structures and processes clear is the third one. The fourth one I talk about is a performance management system, and having a robust and fair and developmental focused performance management system is really important, so that people feel that it is fair across the organization. Everyone, kind of a 4 out of 5 performance across the organization means the same thing in different divisions, and there isn't, in different departments, and there isn't the sense of, well, that line manager is an easier scorer than another one, so I'll get better ratings with him, etc. So having that consistent approach across the organization, make sure it's fair, make sure it's robust, and really importantly, make sure it's developmental focused. So it's not about kind of, it's more about helping people to grow than it is about judging. And it is more about kind of identifying how can people get even better at doing their job they're doing. That'll be number 4. Values and behaviors is number 5, and this is about having an organizational approach and a set of values, and really importantly behaviors. We have 7 values in Fáilte Ireland, and underneath those 7 values we have about 7 or 8 core behaviors in underneath each of those, and values on their own are helpful, but not very helpful, because they end up meaning different things to different people. So going to that next level of detail and saying, when we say this value, these are the key 7 or 8 behaviors that we associate with that value. And then that becomes, into the performance management system, fully connected into it, into the recognition system, and having those values and behaviors. And really importantly, they've got to be developed and owned by the organization. And I kind of have said, look, after we develop those values as an organization, this is what Fáilte Ireland stands for. These are our values. And if you're not comfortable with those values, you probably don't belong here. And that's a tough thing to say, but I mean, that's the organization has developed and bought into those values. And we as a senior leadership team are absolutely committed to them, because that's kind of, who we are and how we work. The next bits that I suppose support that are about 360-degree feedback for all people managers. So, a structured approach whereby we gather, feedback from your boss, your subordinates, your peers, and other stakeholders you work with, and making sure that you've got that 360-degree feedback. Once again, developmental focus to understand how somebody is impacting on other people, because quite often the intent people have is different from the impact people have. And nobody judges anyone by their intent. You end up judging people by their impact. And we all have that scenario where our impact is at times different from our intent. So understanding how we impact on each other is really, really important, and particularly important for people managers. So, in terms of, you don't necessarily need to do 360-degree feedback hugely often, because quite often, what you get out of it, it takes a while to change and work on and develop. But, maybe once every year, once every 2 years, doing 360-degree feedback for all people managers is great to do it for everyone in the organization, but certainly for all people managers, because of how the impact they have on their teams, and making sure that we know that. The other bit connected to that, of course, is external 360-degree feedback. So understanding all of your external stakeholders. And I suppose this is one of the real things about public sector versus private sector. The amount of stakeholders is much broader in the public sector than what I've experienced in the private sector. But even in the private sector, there's a range of stakeholders: your shareholders, your customers, your suppliers, the various agencies you interact with, etc. So, understanding how you as an organization are performing with those various stakeholders, because quite often, if you've got a blind spot on an important external stakeholder relationship, someone in the organization is feeling that pain and the management isn't necessarily aware of it, and that can lead to a disconnection. So having that structured approach around getting that 360-degree feedback from external stakeholders. We've got 3 more to go. Systematic recognition is number 8 on the list in terms of, and this is around both formal and informal and ad hoc and systematic recognition schemes that you really make sure that there is a real focus on recognizing the excellent work that people do, and people have those opportunities to get recognition for that work, and not just recognition from their boss or their boss's boss, but really importantly, I found, is recognition from their peers, recognition within the organization, that when people deliver above and beyond, that is celebrated and that is acknowledged, and people can see that. And I think that's a really important thing. People feel valued. If people don't feel valued, they're not going to feel trusted. And if people don't feel trusted, they're not going to trust their management. So that recognition is really, really important. The other bit I would say is, coming back to that consistent performance management, what I call skip level engagement. So as a line manager, just don't think about your next level down. Don't think about your direct reports. Think about their direct reports as well. And if everyone kind of has that 2-level focus down through the organization, that really helps. And it really helps when there's, there might be particularly difficult relationships sometimes between a line manager and their direct report. If the next level up is somehow, is close enough and is involved and understands enough, then that kind of grandfathering kind of, or grandmothering kind of principle really helps to deliver that kind of consistency, and to help ease out any individual kind of personal, personality clashes or things like that. So that two-level engagement, I think, is important. And finally, that I'd say is, great places to work. And certainly for me as a CEO, to have a survey like Great Places to Work that basically pulls it all together, and to see are all of these things delivering on across the organization, because we get results by department, by division, by level, by tenure, and being able to drill that and understand, are we delivering that? Are we delivering that for all of our people in the organization? Are they all feeling that level of trust, that level of engagement, and understanding when they're not? There's always areas in those surveys, and we're not finished on our journey. We've got things to learn, we've got things to get better at, and we're constantly looking for where are the things that we need to work on, where are the things that are the stones in the shoes of our teams that we need to work on, remove. And the Great Places to Work survey is a really good way of actually getting a really good handle on that. So sorry for the long answer, but I say it's not simple, but they're kind of my top 10.
That's incredible, Paul. And I was busy scribbling away here. I didn't want to interrupt you, lest you forget one of your points. Such good stuff there. I mean, I'm thinking of my own organization's journey. I'm thinking of many organizations we work with and going on similar journeys, and some of that just resonates so strongly. And again, with a lot of what we teach in the business school. I mean, for me, I'm looking at a leader's box here. Get the right team in place, get the trust between them, get that alignment on the vision, self-awareness. Really, developing that high level of self-awareness in your leaders, and taking that feedback and being really open, and really focusing on that development and growth piece in your leaders, and getting them to think across those multiple levels. I mean, some incredible stuff there. And from an individual employee, what really struck me there, show them their role, show them how important they are, and how they fit into the strategy, how they fit into the structures of the organization, how they add value, show them the values, and give them the value roadmap and the behaviors. That's not something that just lives on a wall when you walk into a foyer, but something that's integrated across all of your systems. Recognize and ensure that they're getting that recognition for their contributions and their hard work. And again, really focus on their growth. I mean, there's some incredible things there. And I was kind of looking at 3: clarity, informed, involved, kind of, as I was going through. There's amazing stuff there. That's brilliant takeaways. And Paul, you mentioned a few things there that I suppose I wanted to kind of focus on today and ask you a little bit more about. And one of the things you mentioned there is, you talked about the wide range of stakeholders in the public sector, and you talked about, I suppose you touched on maybe some of the differences between public and private. And that was something I wanted to ask you about, because we have a wide mix of people on the call today, and a number of people working in both public and private. From your experience, I mean, because you have vast experience in both, what are the key differences between, holding a leadership role in the public sector versus the private? And have you had to adapt your leadership style in any way?
Yeah, well, first of all, I absolutely wouldn't say I have vast experience in both. I have, a pretty extensive experience in the private sector. I'm still very much learning and an apprentice in the public sector space, in terms of I was about a year, or just short of a year, working in the UCD Smurfit Business School in the academic area, helping them with their strategy before joining Fáilte Ireland. And I've had just over 4 years with Fáilte Ireland. So, and that they've been my first experiences really in the public sector. So I'm still learning. I've got an awful lot to learn in the area of the public sector still. But I suppose that some of I think, it is, I think, as my experience would be, I kind of say to anyone in the private sector, you should get some experience working in the public sector, because it will expand and grow you and give you a different perspective. than you'd have in the private sector. Equally, I'd say to a lot of people in the public sector, you know, in terms of if they have an opportunity to get some private sector experience, I think it will expand and grow them. I'm a big believer in diversity in all means, but you know, in this context of diversity of experience, and because I think, you know, in terms of it's very easy to learn things from one view of the world and think that's the only view, kind of thing. So getting that different perspective. Some of the things I suppose that I've noticed, yeah, the stakeholders are much wider in the public sector, and when people in the private sector look at state organizations or look at government and stuff like that and kind of go, God, it seems very slow, and God, do they ever get anything done? Well, first of all, I think during the pandemic, that's been proven wrong. The amount of pace and change and stuff that when it's needed, the public sector has been able to be delivered has been phenomenal. Sure. But I think a lot of the reason is the amount of stakeholders that need to be brought along a journey in terms of, and they're all legitimate stakeholders, and they've all got, you know, legitimate reasons to have a stake in something. So you do have to really manage, you know, you do have to really manage all of those stakeholders. So if we were doing, you know, for example, doing a development in an area, so, you know, say we're developing a visitor attraction in a particular county, and that visitor attraction is owned and managed by the OPW. You know, to make the most of that, we've got to work with ourselves as the kind of the tourism authority, the OPW, the local authority, the local industry, the local community. They've all kind of got stakes in it. And then, you know, the local community will have local councillors, there'll be TDs, there'll be respected ministers, you know, so there'll be environmental concerns, etc. So it's a huge array of stakeholders that need to be brought along a journey, and that stakeholder management and trying to deliver that alignment while keeping the momentum and keeping going with as much pace as you can, but taking on board all that input, and trying to find that solution that delivers against all of the legitimate needs of those different stakeholders, is a real challenge and a real learning, that you know, I think, you know, kind of would pay big dividends in terms of that breadth of stakeholder management for anyone to get that experience. I'm certainly very lucky to be getting it now. The other thing, I suppose, is the managing and leading teams. You know, in the private sector, you do have more tools in your armory than you have in the public sector. You know, you can reward people in different ways, in financial ways. You know, there's no problem if someone has done a particularly good job that you can say, look, you know, I know there's companies that say, here, you know, have a weekend away on us, or here's a little bit of a bonus, or you know, here's a pay rise or something like that. And because we're in the public sector and we're dealing with taxpayers' money, and it's got to be fair across all of the public sector, you don't have that freedom to do things like that, as a way of kind of recognizing and rewarding performance. You know, so and there, you know, and there's more, you know, even kind of, you know, appointing people into jobs and stuff, it needs a more formal process, where in some places in the private sector someone can earn a promotion and get a promotion, and there's no kind of recruitment process required. They've just proved it, they're good for it, and they can get that promotion. You know, whereas in the public sector, you know, there's you know, recruitment processes and stuff that all very legitimately needs to be followed, is the right thing to do. But it takes away, so that basically forces leaders to be more creative about recognition systems when you've got less tools to play with, and it forces you to find the other ways to recognize performance. And I've certainly found that you know, that recognition is actually far more powerful than financial recognition. you know, that sense of people feeling valued, that sense of people feeling, that their peers value them, etc., and that you know, and that the wider stakeholder group understand what they've done, etc. That sense of actual being recognized as opposed to being rewarded is, you know, it forces you into more recognition than rewarding, and that's actually more, I think, more valuable for people.
Yeah, and that's certainly what a lot of the research in this area shows in terms of building trust with people as well, about the recognition piece, and I suppose it touches on a lot of the research around motivation and so on, and you know what really motivates people. Is it extrinsic rewards or is it intrinsic rewards and so on? So, and I was going to ask you about that, about your own recognition kind of processes and so on within the organization, and maybe, you know, has that changed, you know, in the last kind of year or so during COVID?
Yeah, it has. I think, you know, kind of it's changed really for the better in a pretty significant way, and we're still not, you know, I don't think, you know, any of us in the organization in Fáilte would say we're 100% happy yet with how we do recognition. We'd like to do it better, or we'd like to do everything better, but recognition is one of those ones that we do still call out as a focus area. We'd like to make a, you know, a further step forward. So I'm not saying we have this cracked yet or anything, but what we've done, I suppose, during COVID. Well, first of all, we have a staff forum who organize kind of an annual recognition awards where, you know, they and last year we pivoted that to our new values after we introduced our values. So we have 7 values, and we had 7 awards, 7 individual staff member awards for living each of those values. So we designed our recognition scheme around our value scheme, and then of course we had our best team award, which was won by our phenomenal information and communication technology team, and you know, those awards are really good, but obviously they're kind of once a year kind of thing. We moved massively in terms of internal communication during the pandemic, and did, you know, things we were doing on all fronts, things we were doing, you know, once a year became once a month. Things that were once a month became once a week. Things that were weekly became daily, just because of the crisis. Because not only did we move to remote working, but obviously the tourism industry was in crisis, and we had to react and completely change everything we were doing to support the tourism industry as well as we possibly could. And so we were all, at the same time as we moved to remote working, we basically practically changed. Everybody's job changed overnight in terms of what it was that they had to do. And we needed to communicate really frequently with everyone to make sure of that. And one of the things we did in that was, we used to do staff conference, an all staff conference twice a year, summer and at Christmas. And we then moved to a weekly all staff broadcast that became known Paul Kelly Telly internally, but it was basically an update from me once a week. But more importantly than anything I was saying was, we brought people on who were working on some of the biggest, on the biggest, most industry critical projects to talk about what they were doing on that weekly call. And that was a really good example of where people could come on, and simply, it was really valuable to the organization because it was keeping everyone up to date with what people were doing, and what was going on, which was information they needed to know. But it also gave those teams an opportunity to showcase what they were doing to the rest of the organization, and it became a way for us to acknowledge and to celebrate the great work that was going on, and that became a weekly thing. So that was just in addition to, you know, our various internal communications and stuff like that. But that keeping that giving that public recognition amongst peers for the work people are doing is really important.
I mean, that's great stuff, Paul. And you know, you did touch on it. I mean, organizations have been changed fundamentally overnight. I know in education, I can't think of one thing that we do that didn't change. And I think there was a lot of speed, to be fair, to people within public sector organizations actually responded phenomenally in most cases. So it's been incredible to see. Paul, just in terms of you mentioned, just to bring you back a little bit, I'm gonna finish with two questions because I want to leave a bit of time for other questions coming in. You mentioned about kind of having to balance multiple stakeholders, and you know, as a leader, you have to make decisions that aren't always going to be popular with everyone, right? So that's just the nature of it. And you have diversity of views and opinions and vision and things. As you expand outside your organization, how do you go about making decisions that may damage trust in some areas or could potentially damage trust? Those difficult decisions.
I think you make sure that you listen. First of all, the way I would do is I would listen. I try. It sounds bizarre, but I try and take as few decisions as possible because I generally find that my team and their teams make better decisions than I do because they know the area in more detail. So. But you've got to make sure decisions are made. So I believe part of your job as leader is not about making decisions, but making sure decisions get made. So I would say that it's about when a decision does need to be made by me on a particular issue, that everyone feels the opportunity that they've been listened to, their views have been taken on board. And in that scenario, you do tend to find, apologies, I've got a dog barking in the background, the joys of working at home.
Yeah.
In that scenario, I always find that people actually, once they feel the views have been expressed, they want a decision, in terms of, they actually kind of go, look, Paul, we need you to make a decision here. There's different views. Everyone's had their views expressed. So, let's just make a decision and get on with it. I think once people, and really important, once people know that your decision is based on your commitment to the aligned mission of the organization.
Yeah.
So once you kind of say, look, the reason I'm making this decision is because of, I believe it will give us the best chances of delivering our mission. And it's in terms of so I think that's, I don't think there's any more secret to that.
I love that kind of, and it touches again just on the listening and participative decision making, that you mentioned earlier. And I don't know if you know Patrick Lencioni's work around building trust in teams and trust being a foundation. And if people genuinely feel like they've been listened to, and but you need a culture of trust for people to be comfortable to air their views and to kick those views around as a team, and and consider everything, then people feel that there's that all of their insights have been taken on board, and it mightn't always be the decision that they would agree with at that time, but at least they know there's a process there, in terms of decision making, and that alignment to the mission is obviously so crucial. Paul, I'm going to ask one last question and I think it's an interesting one, and you've touched on some of it, and I just encourage our attendees to have a think about any questions you have then for the remainder of the session. So pop them in the Q&A or chat there. Paul, you mentioned about a couple of the things about pivoting from for people working in that kind of working from home really over during the pandemic, and the importance of the changes that you've had to make around communications and around, recognition and some of those things. Just in terms of your general views, I suppose we don't know for sure what the work balance will be in every organization, and it will differ into the future. But given that there's more likely to be a more of a kind of a hybrid type model in a lot of organizations, just what's your view finally on maintaining trust in that type of more of a hybrid kind of model with more remote working?
Yeah, I think kind of keeping in contact is probably because what you miss in the hybrid, which you miss in the virtual working world is you miss the informal chat at the cup of coffee, at the coffee station, the dropping around somebody's desk, and that kind of, everything's got to be more purposeful. Like I'm I'm calling this person with this agenda item to discuss. And if not, I'm not calling that person. Whereas, in an office environment, I'd walk by them in the corridor and have a chat, and it wouldn't be anything.
Naturally, yeah,
it's natural, and it just kind of happens. So I think, in terms of trying to maintain those, trying to maintain contact as much as possible, it does require more of that. I think really important is, and the other thing then as well is that when people are under pressure, it may be harder to spot, because you're not in the physical proximity with them, and I think certainly within Fáilte Ireland, one of the biggest concern I have is that people are working too hard, and they are working too long hours, and it's not sustainable, and you can't sprint a marathon, and it kind of feels like we're a lot of people in Fáilte have been going for the last year and a half at sprint pace, and you can do that for a while in a crisis, but you can't do it all the time, and that's in terms of kind of jumping from one Zoom meeting straight into another one without having a couple of minutes to get up and stretch your legs and just get the body moving again. You're missing that walking from one meeting room to another, which just gives you a mental break. You're kind of straight out of work and maybe straight back into family life or caring or whatever you've got going on. You don't have you don't naturally have the little bit of the commute to switch off, give yourself a rest and listen to the radio or whatever. So I think it's making sure the welfare of staff is cared for is going to be one of the big challenges has been. So I think, in terms of but there's a lot of great things that people are really enjoying about the flexibility that we've earned, and so I think it's about keeping both of those. It's absolutely about keeping the best of what we've learned, and bringing back the best of what we've what we've missed over the last year and a half or so.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And it's interesting. Some virtual leaders I've interviewed in the last couple of years, one of them talked about being more intentional as a virtual leader, being more intentional in showing you care, being more intentional in checking in and making sure that you have those informal touch points. And I think a lot of that comes back to trust. If there's trust in the relationship, people are more likely to be open and more likely to reach out and tell you when they're struggling as well. Whereas when that level of trust, and as you say, if people feel that their managers don't have their back, that's a hard conversation sometimes, that level of vulnerability. And vulnerability comes from trust. So I think that's all great stuff there. And that kind of whole notion of being zoomed out, I think a lot of us kind of feel that at the moment, that those natural breaks and things, even walking between meetings or, between offices and things don't happen anymore. Paul, that's great. I kind of think we all need a very nice summer and some nice weather, which I think will help yourself and your colleagues in your organization and the industry. So let's pray for that. I'm just going to pop to, and I have, just so the audience know, I have taken some questions in advance, and we fed into some of the areas there and my questions from Paul. There's two quick questions here. One is, thinking about your own relationship you have with your HR director, and Jim mentioned, some recent talks and events and so on with some of your colleagues. What attributes are you looking for, Paul, from great HR leaders?
Well, we're phenomenally lucky in Fáilte Ireland. We've a super head of HR, Sharon Balmain, and she reports to a super director of operations, Deborah Nolan. I've worked with some other fantastic HR professionals in my time in Diageo, people like Gary Elliott, Robert Hutchinson, Maeve Conroy. I've really had worked with some super HR people. I've learned a huge amount from, and one of the important things that comes to mind is bravery. I mean, you've got to you've got to be willing to get in your CEO's face, as a head of HR, in terms of to sit down with however senior anyone is in the organization, and if they're doing something that's having an unintended negative impact on some of the team members, or on a section of the organization or whatever, you've got to be prepared to sit down with your CEO and say, look, because HR is a really important, really important for HR to have a really good trusting relationship with all of the staff, and that HR is kind of a good channel of communication. So if there's issues bubbling up, HR hear about it. HR those trusting relationships, and then they can appropriately, be prepared to, to front up to people like me and say, Paul, you got to do better in this area, or you've got to stop doing this because it's having this kind of impact that you weren't aware of, etc. So that's really important. Understanding of the business and development orientation are other things in terms of that sense of, making sure that HR are close enough and understand what's required at the business, and what skills are people required to have, and how they're getting on in terms of meeting the business needs, and then that sense of really focusing on how to develop individuals, teams, and the organization, and looking at looking at that stuff. One of the things, for example, our HR director now is working on for us is helping us as a senior leadership team to get the right kind of coaching and development that we need as a leadership team to keep on our journey, and to keep getting better and better. So it's that type of developmental focus.
It really strikes me, because there's great coherency there between your previous answer about trust building and three kind of things there, always aligned with the mission and where we're going, and the vision, that growth kind of mindset within the organization, that focus, and really that focus across levels. So ensuring that you always have that view across the organization to make sure. So that's really consistent with the kind of 10 brilliant principles you gave us earlier. Paul, just I suppose I'm gonna leave it with one quick question, and then we'll do a quick wrap. So this is an interesting one that comes up time and time again. We all come to our roles with experience of our various different kind of relationships that we've had in the past. And sometimes people have had bad relationships in the past, and maybe that damages their ability to trust people easily and so on. Have you come across that? Have you any tips on how do you build trust with people that don't trust easily? Or is it any different, from what you've said?
I think it just takes more investment and more time, and a higher demanding more in terms of a high standard of integrity. One of my directors, Paul Keeley, has a great phrase, which is, I have a stone in my shoe. And it's a great kind of opening phrase to get at an issue, in terms of, because that's exactly, it's like a stone in my shoe. Let's talk, let's get the stone out on the table and talk about it,
Love that,
so I think it's that high, it's not walking around with stones in your shoes. That's, if you have a stone in your shoe, you got to get it out and you got to talk about it. You got to talk about it with respect for the other person. You've got to listen hard. You got to understand the difference between intent and impact. You've got to own your own emotions in that sort of stuff. So if somebody is doing something that makes you feel a certain way, you've got to engage in that. You engage in it on how you feel, how that makes you feel, not in an accusatory way around what they're doing, but if it makes you feel a certain way, you've got to be able to talk about how it makes you feel. I have found the most powerful relationships and the biggest increases in business performance have been unlocked because of a tough conversation that started from a place of low trust. Where you sat down with somebody and you said, I have an issue here, and I have an issue in our relationship, and this is what it is. And I found that actually they can be the most powerful conversations. And
I think, and because we'll wrap now, but just to say to people, there's this myth that trust can't be repaired. And a lot of my own research shows that some of the strongest levels of trust have been built in relationships that were once challenging relationship. So I absolutely agree with that. Paul, we're just on time now and we'll probably get a hard cut off. I'd like to thank you so much. That's wonderful. I have a lot of really great stuff there. We're going through organizational redesign and a new strategy at the moment. Some wonderful takeaways there, and I'm sure our audience have some wonderful takeaways as well. I know we have a recording of this event. I'd like to just thank you and again, thank the team at Great Place to Work. It's wonderful to be involved in this and in these discussions. I think it just adds so much value for the community, and I hope people have taken huge value from it today. And as I say, I hope we have a wonderful summer that we can, not just for your organization and your industry, but for all of us, because I think we all really need it after a tough year or so. So Paul, thanks again. Thanks to everyone on the call, and to Jim and his colleagues at Great Place to Work. And hopefully we'll see you all at the next event.
Thanks very much, Colin. Thank you, Paul. Thanks to Fáilte Ireland and the entire team for their huge contribution that they're making in terms of supporting the industry and supporting the country. It was one of the things we didn't get into, but if we want to look at any of the stats, it is really impressive, and it's really impressive how the organization has pivoted over the past while. And congratulations on being a best workplace as well, of course. So our most trusted leader for 2021. Thank you very much, Paul. Thanks, everybody. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks all. Have a great day.